Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar in micro budget filmmaking. My name is Chris Rotolo. I'm a program manager here at McMaster Continuing Ed. I'm very lucky to have with us Kire Paputz, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. Before I do, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. McMaster would like to acknowledge and recognize that we're located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So we are very fortunate today to have an award-winning filmmaker with us. Kire is, as you can see, a filmmaker, obviously an animal lover, and he's been making films pretty much his entire life. He's done multiple aspects of filmmaking, writing, editing, producing, and directing his own films. And his films have played around the world at film festivals. He's a recognized expert in filmmaking, has generally done it on a budget, and he's here to share with us everything he's learned in doing that successfully. So Kire, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, everybody. I am here today to talk about micro budget filmmaking. So the big question first is, what is micro budget? Um, Micro budget for me is filmmaking that is has financing basically anything under 250K. That's where I kind of draw the line. And there is a few reasons for that. One is because the minimum budget to be eligible to apply to telefilm is 250K. If your film is under that, you cannot apply for telefilm funding. 250K is also really close to the maximum budget you can have when you're applying to the three main arts councils within Canada. So you have, Canada Arts Council, which is nationwide, Ontario Arts Council, which is for Ontario, and then Toronto for Toronto. So again, different provinces will have their own provincial arts council grant, and even same with cities, they'll have their own arts council grant. In this case, because I am from Toronto and working, mostly Toronto Hamilton, I'll be focusing on these three specific arts council grants. Go for it, Chris. So, again, let's look at the characteristics of micro budget filmmaking. So, when you think of micro budget, a lot of things might come to mind. You might think minimal cast, right? Not many actors. The more actors you have to pay, the more money you will need. You think of things like having fewer or minimal locations, right? When you're making a micro budget film, you're probably not going to be running around 20 different locations for 20 different days. Um, you might think of something like a small or a skeleton crew. You're not going to have production vehicles, big trucks, trailers for your cast. It's literally going to be, maybe working out of a cube truck that's going to house basically all of your equipment, all of your grip and lighting and all of your camera packages. A lot of micro budget filmmaking also revolves around, I find, character driven storytelling or also emotionally driven storytelling. Again, because with micro budget film, you just don't have the budget to have something that is, action packed, right? You're not going to have explosives, you're not going to have big chase sequences and all this stuff. It's usually going to be more, in many ways, a character driven piece. Um, because when you think about, again, when you have no money to make a movie, it really does affect every single aspect of filmmaking, right? Right from the concept, right from your script writing, all the way to distribution. All right, Chris. So, I want to talk a minute about the pros and cons of micro budget filmmaking. For me, I think the big pros or the pluses are in many ways you have much more control and less compromise, right? When you have less money, you can pretty much do what you want. It's only when you have tons of money and different investors, those people are going to want to see a return on their investment, which, in those cases will probably affect, your filmmaking. You'll affect your story. It'll affect your casting, right? Because they're going to want to make sure they get their money back. Um, in many ways, it's less people to manage. Again, on a typical movie set that is not micro budget, you're probably, looking at, a crew of 60 or more people, right? And that's a lot of people to manage, different departments, different teams, when you're working in the micro budget range or low budget range. I've had crew sizes that were probably 20 people on the larger end, which is still a lot of people to manage. But I've also made films where just, me and a camera and an assistant, right? So again, a lot of people to manage. There's less craziness. You have to deal with as many, personalities, right? That could be a big thing with movies. Um, Another big pro I find is usually, for the most part, because most of the funding is usually coming from Arts Council grants. Maybe it's coming from your own private investment, or maybe you're also looking at crowdfunding. You usually maintain the ownership of your work, right? If you are working with someone like an investor, they're probably going to own the finished product because it is, their money paying for the film. So one of the benefits again is you maintain the ownership of your work, which means if it makes any money, it goes right back to you. Usually any decision in terms of distribution, you have full say over what that is. And again, last but not least, obviously, when you have less money, it's cheaper to finance, right? You don't have to worry about raising millions of dollars to make your film. You can usually get something together enough between Arts Council grants, maybe some of your own funding, deferrals is a big thing, and then also, something like crowdfunding. So that's, I think, the pros. The cons, of course, are the direct opposite. When you have little to no money to make your movie, it will affect every aspect of filmmaking, right? It will affect, how many people you can hire. It'll affect how many shoot days you can actually shoot, which is a big thing. It will affect locations. It'll affect cast. It'll also affect your marketing budget. A lot of times, when you're working in the micro budget range, you know, all of your money is spent on just getting the film shot and finished. There's usually not any money left for marketing, right? So you have to kind of get crafty on how do I now market this movie with no money, which we'll get into in a little bit. Um, in many ways, it can limit creativity, just in the sense where, again, working at the micro budget range, you're probably not going to be making an action film, right? You're not going to have big explosions and lots of practical effects. Um, Again, in many ways, it will limit your publicity. You know, um, in many ways, again, you don't have the money for marketing, but also, usually at the micro budget range, you are not working with or well known or established actors. You're usually working maybe with, in many cases, non-union actors, people who maybe have never acted before or who, don't have star power or a name. So in many ways, you don't have the name star to help sell your movies. You have to find other angles to, have it kind of rise above and compete with movies that do have like Brad Pitt and so on, right? And again, it can limit distribution. Again, in the same way, a distributor is to look at your movie, they're going to say, if you don't have a well-known actor that they can use as an angle to sell your movie, what are the marketing hooks for your film? So in many ways, it can limit distribution. Not always. Like you can find usually smaller distributors will take your film on, but I'm talking more like the bigger players in Canada. might not look at your film because doesn't have that star power or it doesn't have the director power behind it. Again, not always the case. You do hear stories about a low budget film that does really well on the film festival circuit. It becomes like a darling. It wins a bunch of awards. It gets a bunch of recognition. And it gets a bunch of buzz. And in many ways, a larger distributor will look at that film because it already has a bit of hype behind it. But if you're someone who doesn't have that hype behind it, it can be hard to kind of get that traction for distribution. Um, and not to knock the wind out of anybody's sails, but I do like to say, these are just kind of guidelines, right? What I'm talking about here. There really is no magic formula to creating a successful micro budget film. Every film is unique. And again, the idea of success looks different to every single person, right? Like my idea of what success is for my films is very different than what yours might be as a filmmaker. I have used a lot of what I'm talking about, in my films, less fewer actors, fewer locations, but I've also pushed myself to try to go beyond that and have my film not feel like a film that was made for 250K, but make it feel like it was made for like 1 or 2 million. And again, we'll talk more about that as well as we go through these slides. Yeah, Chris, next slide, please. So again, let's talk about some of the impacts outside of the financial restraints of making a micro budget film. Um, I think it's important to talk about the physical, mental, and emotional impact it will have on you. Um, because again, it's the idea of micro budget, it goes beyond just a budget limitation. The big thing about micro budget filmmaking is about wearing multiple hats at the same time. So in my case, I'm the writer usually, I am the director, I am the lead producer. In many cases, I am also the person who is the locations manager. I'm finding locations. I'm usually doing a lot of the casting myself. Although I've had help in the past. Um, and many times I've been the person who is literally picking up the production truck in the morning with all the gear and driving to the set. I'm the person who is driving that production truck back to lockup at night, locking up and then going home, right? Because again, it's with micro budget filmmaking, it's you can't afford to hire 60 people. You have to find ways to wear multiple hats, and where are areas where I can basically extend myself and save a few bucks and hopefully put that money that would go towards hiring that person back on the screen. Um, a big thing is being able to deal with stress, right? I think making any film, of uh, regardless of the budget, is stress. I mean, they always say, more money, more problems, right? It's a different kind of stress. In many cases, stress with low budget filmmaking it's really about problem solving. It's, because you don't have money to throw at your problems that arise. And I will guarantee you, like you can, you know, really spend time in pre-production, making sure everything is as, planned as possible. There will things that will arise on set that are out of your control. And you go, okay, now how do I deal with this problem quickly so I don't lose my shoot day? And again, I don't have money to throw at the problem, so it has to be done in a more creative way. So that's for me, it's really about being adaptive, being able to turn your limitations into strengths, right? Again, you don't have money behind you to throw at your problems. How do I find, a way to fix this really quickly and with no money? I can give you a quick example of that. Shooting my second feature film, The Last Porno Show. We were shooting in a run-down movie theater in the east end of Toronto. It was our second or third day of filming in the cinema. We were filming there for about 10 days. The second or third day in, the cast and crew came to me and they're like, "Hey, we're getting these weird like rashes and bites on us." And I'm like, "Oh God," right? So of course, we had to shut down production for the rest of the day. And I had to call in an exterminator to come in because the landlord of the establishment wouldn't take responsibility. And my fear was it was bed bugs or some kind of big thing. But luckily, it was just fleas. So we, from all the dead rats that were in this establishment, that, again, it was like a really horrible place to be filming in. But again, when you have no money, I couldn't afford to rent out the review for 10 days. It wasn't possible, right? So I had to find this, again, kind of rundown cinema. But again, it's basically, we lost like half our day because of this problem that I did not expect. I did not expect to be spending $1,000 on renting a fumigator to come in and get rid of these fleas, right? So again, something I didn't plan for, had to do, right? So again, things will come up as you're filming. It's figuring out how do you pivot quickly and not lose time. All right, Chris. Next, yeah, great. So, I'm making this sound horrible, right? Like, why would you even want to do this to yourself? Why would you even want to make a micro budget film? A big part of it is because micro budget filmmaking is basically essential for aspiring filmmakers, producers who are just starting out, who may not have the experience and also the track record to obtain or to be eligible for large amounts of funding, say from telefilm, right? So it's really kind of more like a stepping stone for larger amounts of funding for future projects. In this industry, it's really about you kind of have to prove yourself, and sometimes you got to prove yourself multiple times. Like I've been someone who's had 3 films premiere at TIFF, and I am still working at this budget level because it is really competitive, right? Um, so I also think a positive to working in the micro budget range is, working with limitations, I think will only strengthen you as a filmmaker and will help you prepare for future projects. The fact that I can pull off, a good film for 250K or less, like I know I would just kill it if I had $2 million to make a movie. I would have no problem making a movie for that and make it successful. So I think again, the fact that I've had to be scrappy and be flexible and adaptive at a low budget range, it makes me more confident that when I do get that $1 million break or more, I am confident I'll be able to accomplish that no problem. And again, I think we're lastly, you know, the big thing is, it is very rewarding, both artistically and financially. Again, when you spend less money to make a movie, there is an even better chance you'll make money back. I produced a movie for a friend a few years ago called Self Driver. We made the movie for basically $20,000. It did well on the genre movie circuit, so it premiered at a bunch of festivals that were genre based and won a bunch of awards at Fantasia. From there, we got distribution from Mongrel Media. We got a sales agent in Germany. The movie made a sale to Crave, so we got money back for that. And my buddy Mike, who directed it, he's made his investment back just from sales to Crave and also through other worldwide sales, right? So again, it is possible to make your money back. It's a lot harder, obviously, when you're spending more like $1 million or 2 million, right? Go for it, Chris. So again, you know, the big thing about working at this micro budget range, again, it's basically thinking outside the box. It's about, turning your limitations into strengths. And it doesn't mean it can't, again, only because you're working with a lower budget, it doesn't mean you can't pull off something really, really great. Um, yeah. So here are a few tips I think that I've used that work well. A big thing is writing for locations you have access to, right? That will save money. If you're not paying for a location, if you get a free location, that'll save a lot of money. One thing I did, so for my first feature film, The Rainbow Kid, I wanted to have a car graveyard, and there's like a car crash scene. I'm like, well, how the hell am I going to do that with no money? If I had to recreate basically a landscape of rusted out cars and have a car crash, that would have been basically my whole budget. Luckily, my uncle had a friend who has a piece of land up north that was ideal. It was just, a big chunk of land. He had a bunch of rotting cars on it. And he had some cars that were really beat up. They actually still kind of ran. I'm like, great. So we'll get this one car and we'll crash it into a tree, and that'll be our car crash. And again, we pulled it off, and all it costed us was our time to drive there. Right? I didn't spend any money on renting the location or renting or anything else. It just really took us. It was a bit of a trek. It was like 3 hour drive there and back. So we lost more shoot time for our day, but again, we made up for that, and the production value of that made our film look like $1 million because again the free location. Um, One big thing I find is shooting on weekends with friends. When I did my first few short films, I shot a Friday through Sunday. I had friends come out and they worked for free. The big thing is I just made sure I fed them well, right? And so that's a big thing. That leads to my next thing is, um, there are a lot of things you can skimp out on. I think when you're doing a low budget film, I would strongly suggest you do not skimp out on food and beverages for your cast and crew. A lot of times with the micro budget filmmaking, people are working for below their normal rate or they're working for free. The least you can do is feed them well, make sure they're comfortable. That is because it will really be a big morale booster. I remember when I was at university still, I was doing a student film, a thesis film, and one of my fellow peers decided they would just feed the crew candy for lunch, like old Halloween candy, and you're doing like a 12+ hour day. You can't do that on eating candy, right? So and like we were really upset and pissed off by that, and so don't upset your crew, don't upset your cast. Make sure they are at least fed for and taken care of in that sense. A big thing I always say is some people really focus on trying to raise all the money from the beginning. They want to raise all their money to get the film shot from script to completion. My big thing is like focus on getting the film shot, because once it's shot, you can take your time. You can take a month off. You can edit on your own time. It takes no time, no money to edit. Edit can be on your own time. And it's easier to find completion funding for your film once you have a rough cut, right? If someone can watch a rough cut and go, okay, I can kind of see what this is, there's less of a risk in giving money for that. It's more of a risk to say, here's my crazy script, give me money. But if an investor can see basically a finished product, it's much more enticing for that investor, right? Uh, you know, Deferrals is great. If you can't pay people upfront or even like a full wage upfront, say, hey, I can pay you so much now. If the film makes money, I'll give you a deferral, right? Great idea. You know, I always say build a shooting schedule that minimizes location moves, right? When you location moves during your same shoot day, that's what's really going to slow you down, and that's what's going to kill you. So try to always shoot at locations on the same day, or don't move around. If you're at location for 5 days, be at the same place for 5 days, and then move on. A big thing is leading by example. Don't be a diva. In my case, again, I'm wearing multiple hats as a director. I want to, again, people are there to help you. They're there making, under what they normally make. They're usually there because they believe in you and they believe in the project. So make sure you really lead by example, and you are the hardest person working on that set. Don't be, oh, sorry, I can't move tables, or I can't just come directly. Not, do whatever needs to get done. There's no small task, right? And again, if you don't have a deadline, take your time with the edit. Don't rush through it. And that's the same with writing. I always say, writing only takes time. It doesn't take money to write a script. You have to just dedicate your time to doing it and putting the hours in. Uh, Next slide, Chris.
So this is the example, I think, of your car crash scene, right?
Yeah, so this is what we did with my location. Right? So that cost me no money. Crazy. Next clip. Sorry, go to the next slide. Chris? Yeah, great. So let's talk about some marketing tips really, really quick. So for me, I find drive all of your film social media activity through your personal account. Why is that? Because I find people they make Facebook accounts, they make Instagram accounts for their films, and that's great when the film is just kind of doing festivals or if it's being released. But after that, it kind of dies, and your account sits empty, right? So what's the point of creating all these new accounts that are going to eventually die? Why not, drive all that traffic to you? Because I feel like a big thing with filmmaking is it's about building your own brand as a filmmaker. If you can build people and have them keep coming back to you, as opposed to always have to rebuild a new audience with every new movie. It's just going to help you in the long run. Um, Start building your audience during pre-production. Talk about you know post about what you're doing. Talk about the struggles. Talk about writing. Talk about applying for grants. Talk about we did rehearsals today. Get people excited from the onset, because if people are following your journey from the concept to completion, and say your film gets out and it does really well, someone goes, oh man, I remember he was talking about doing that like 2 years ago, and now it's complete. They might be more excited to actually come and support you because they feel like they've been on this journey with you from the beginning to now. um, I always say consider guerrilla marketing. Again, you really don't have the funding to compete with the big players. So you have to find ways to think outside the box in terms of how do I get this film seen. And I'm going to show you some marketing things I did in the next slide. But again, thinking outside the box, right? You can't compete with Sony and all those big people, so don't try to think outside the box. Find new ways to find your audience. One big thing is reaching out to celebrities and influencers who maybe are passionate about the film's themes and causes. So to go back to my first film, my first feature film, The Rainbow Kid, the film starred two actors with Down syndrome. And I decided to really focus on the special needs community, not only in Canada, but worldwide. The special needs community is something that is universal. So I reached out to different organizations when I was crowdfunding to say, hey, can you share this crowdfunding, with your people, with your community? And we ended up raising like $40,000 because I was able to reach people outside of my family and friends. I also reached out to celebrities. I remember like Biff Naked and Pam Grier, retweeted a lot of my stuff because they are heavily involved with the special needs community, right? So again, who are people out there who might champion your cause? So to think about that. Create a film festival strategy. This is a big thing. Film festivals really want premiere status. They really want that world premiere or that international premiere, or at the least they want like that, local premiere. So when you're thinking about your festivals, if you want to hopefully premiere at a large like tier A festival like TIFF or Sundance, don't be submitting to like some really small festival that no one's ever heard of. Because if it plays there, the chances of playing TIFF or Sundance are basically gone, right? So again, it might take more time because you're now focusing on the tier A festivals, but you know, think about that first. You know, I was fortunate, I've had 3 films premiere at TIFF. Once it premieres at TIFF, I use it as leverage for other festivals. Instead of me paying, tons of money for other festivals on Festival Freeway, I will reach out to the programmers and say, hey, listen, we just premiered at TIFF. We got a lot of great press, a lot of great buzz. Do you want to look at this film? And they will usually give you a free, you know, a fee waiver code to say, yes, please submit. We'd love to look at it, right? So, that all of a sudden, you're spending a lot less money on paying for festival applications. Um, again, so yeah, that's using as leverage for for other festivals, and that not
So
every
here,
festival. Yep, yep,
so I was going to say,
yes,
what are some examples of, can you tell us a bit about examples of guerrilla marketing that you've done?
yep. So let's go to the next slide, and I will talk about that in a second.
Okay. We don't have a next slide.
Oh, the clip, the David Bronstein clip,
Let
plus
me,
the
let me see if I
you
can
you know what? Okay, so okay, here's an example. So I'll give you an example. So one thing I did uh, was for last porno show. I made this really kind of crazy ad, and basically the ad was basically I kind of positioned it as a person who was really sad that there was no adult cinemas left in the city, right? Because there is none in Toronto. The last one was the Metro. It closed down years ago. I made this kind of like fake ad about a guy who was looking for places to meet people because he really missed going to adult cinemas to kind of have encounters, right? And I put it up around the city, and people were taking photos and they were posting it online. And it started to kind of collect, people were posting everywhere, and it kind of like caught fire. I remember it ended up in a bunch of different groups. One being the Weird Toronto group, which is kind of like perfect for from my kind of community. And people were commenting and they were going on it, and I had a link at the bottom of what it was. People had to like read the ad, and they went to the link and they go, oh, it's a movie premiere, right? So it was kind of like using, again, thinking outside the box and getting people to pay attention to what the movie is and finding a new audience. So that's one small example. I do find postering really does help still. I had a new film that just came out called Junkie Run, and I posted all around Hamilton. And I remember at our screening, which was basically sold out, I go, how many people are here because they saw a poster on the street? And like at least a third of people like raise their hands. So like, old school canvassing does still work. In other ways, I did one thing I did for also last porno show was I did a cameo. You know what that is? Basically, cameo is a site where you can like pay a celebrity to kind of like sing happy birthday or give you some kind of pitch or whatever. And so I thought it'd be a great idea to get Ron Jeremy to do a cameo and promote the last porno show, him being the most maybe well-known porn star of all times. And at the time, it was great. However, you got to be careful. It backfired because a year later, Ron Jeremy, all of a sudden was being arrested and charged with multiple cases of sexual assault and stuff. So in that case, it kind of backfired later. But at the time, it really helped me in terms of creating more awareness and buzz for the film. So in that case, I got burned a bit later on, but at the time, it really worked out pretty well. So just again, yeah, think outside the box. So are there certain angles to your film that only work for your film that you can then market? But every film is unique. Every film is very different. You're going to have to figure out what is it about your film that is marketable that I can, kind of find ways that aren't going to be spending $1 million on marketing. I do find also Facebook ads, Instagram ads are really, really helpful. They can be really cheap. You don't spend a lot of money, and you really like just target those ads, like figure out who your audience is. I think a big thing with marketing for micro budget is figuring out who your audience is. Uh, One last thing I noticed I'll mention. So there was a movie that came out in Toronto last year. It was called the PT Poo Poo Man. And I remember I saw these posters all around the city, and it was like a bright yellow paper, and all it said was the PT Poo Poo Man. I was like, that's great. What is this? I was very curious, and I looked into it, and this person had made a really low budget film and has built now like a huge cult following just based on these kind of crazy ads he put around the city, right? And he kind of found his audience. He went from like renting out cinemas himself to now being programmed all around the States and all around Canada, all because he kind of had a really kind of fun, kind of quirky, poster that people picked up on, right? So, yeah, um,
Uh,
that
I
might be
do have
the
another
yeah, Chris, yeah,
follow-up question for you. You just
yeah,
had the Toronto
yeah.
premiere of Junkie Run like 2 weeks ago, right?
I did. So Junkie Run had a sold out screening in Toronto at the Paradise Cinema 2 weeks ago. It's playing in Hamilton, It's playing at the Westdale on April 8th. It's playing in London, Ontario, in early March coming up. If you want about myself as a filmmaker, my films, where you can find them, please follow my website, which is madebypeople.com. And you'll learn lots more about what I teach, about my films, about me as a filmmaker, and all that kind of fun stuff.
So, do you want to tell us a bit about your strategy with premieres?
Yeah. So, I mean, the good thing about a festival is a lot of the work's taken care of for you. Like when you play TIFF, like those screenings just sell out because everybody wants to go to TIFF and see a movie. So you're really more competing for distribution or getting press at that point. In terms of getting a solo screening, it's very simple. I think premiering for me more myself, like I've taken more of a kind of a self distribution model for my latest film, Junkie Run, because I got burned on my first movie, Rainbow Kid. I gave it away basically for nothing. They own the film for 10 years. They send you these distribution reports every 6 months, and you kind of see the money that the movie's making, but you don't see any of that because it goes back into all their costs that they're spending on the movie, their overhead. So I basically made no money on my first movie for 10 years. I got the rights back about 2 months ago, so now I can finally start seeing money. So again, that's a whole other discussion, self distribution. I could spend like an hour on. But yeah, so I think, as a first time filmmaker, you're very excited about getting your film out there. You just want people to see it. But, I always say, you know, it's better to take no deal over a bad deal, right? What's the point of putting your heart and soul in something you've made, only have some other person make money off it and you don't see a cent, right? So I'm very cautious now about what I do with my films. And I think these days, there are so many other platforms for self distribution. Like you don't need the big players to get your films on streaming. You can do it through an aggregator, right? Um, you don't need someone to program movie at a theater. You can do it yourself, right? Um, Broadcast, you can approach Bell and you can pitch CBC on your own. You don't need people to do that for you. Again, it is more work, but the reward is much better because you're going to keep all the money you make. It's not going to go to that person who just kind of basically did the introduction, did themselves.
Okay. I'm going to talk a bit about some of our offerings at McMaster real briefly, and then we'll go to Q&A. Right?
Great.
So, Kirei and I have been in conversation for a while. Our hope is to bring Kirei to McMaster and maybe offer a production program in the near future. In the meantime, Kirei's been kind enough to find other ways to contribute to the McMaster community like this webinar. I will note that this webinar has seen probably twice the registration and twice the attendance that we normally see. So I think this is a good indicator of a demand. And there is a lot of production that happens in Hamilton. There's a lot of talk about. We've heard Kirei talk about operations, self-distribution, and the myriad of creative choices that need to be made. In the meantime, we have two programs that are likely relevant to some of you. We have our marketing program and our digital marketing program. I will talk briefly about these. These are amazing programs. We've got partnerships with like the CMA to fast track for the certified marketing credential and stuff like that. But I think that's likely less relevant. It seems following the chat that we have a lot of entrepreneurs and such on the call. So I'll talk a little bit more about where there might be value for you here for some of the stuff. You likely all know more about production and filmmaking than I do. But there is a lot of that other stuff like Kirei talked about that needs to happen even after the film is done. And perhaps we have opportunities that help you with that. So first, probably worth discussing is our marketing program. It was designed in association with the DeGroote School of Business, and it's about giving you practical, real world, immediate usage skills to help you with marketing of particular interest to this group. We have a number of performance-based marketing courses. So these are courses in how to do a marketing plan and how to manage performance of your marketing so that you're getting a good ROI. We've got a course in marketing channels and budgets, which helps you determine where you should be doing your marketing and how much you spend. Also of interest might be our market research and consumer behavior courses. So if you want to understand how people make decisions related to your marketing, these are cutting edge. These represent data-driven emerging best practices and protocols. They're proven, but they've been in usage for a couple of years versus like the more traditional marketing you might have learned about in high school that uses like 70-year-old marketing theories based on psychology. These ones look to more modern marketing theories based on sociology and anthropology, which is the study of group behavior versus individuals. We've also got two other courses that might be of interest to the group here. We have a media planning and buying course. So if you are thinking about doing a lot of your own marketing, understanding rate sheets, if you want to advertise in a newspaper, understanding what impressions are and that sort of thing can be helpful. As well as we've got a new course, developing a marketing narrative. So this is a communication course tailored to marketing professionals typically, but it can be useful in taking your storytelling knowledge that you already have and applying that to the marketing that you do. If you choose to go this route, all the courses are open enrollment, so you can do only the courses that interest you. If you are interested in completing a credential, there are a number of marketing credentials that are available. These are all 100% online asynchronous, so you can do them when and how is best for you. The other alternative that you might be interested in is our digital marketing program. Both programs have been revised in the last couple of years. Our digital marketing program is cutting edge, including what is the appropriate use of AI in content marketing. It's a highly strategic course, and that's where we differentiated it. It started out as a course for marketing leaders who were having a transition into digital, but everybody's done that now. So we've added in a lot of elements to enrich the content. We've added third-party practical credentials so that you understand how Google and HubSpot and other platforms work. We've got a lot of experiential learning. You're working with clients on two of the three courses, like real-world clients. You're using a very detailed, pretty much real-world simulation on another course. And we're basically teaching you about the latest, and I mean latest digital marketing trends, applications, platforms, and best practices. So either of these programs might be useful to you to augment the promotion of the work that you're doing, because it seems like we have a lot of filmmakers and aspiring filmmakers in the chat, at least.
Absolutely.
I want to thank everybody for attending, and a special thank you to Kirei for showing a wealth of knowledge that you've built up over decades, as youthful as you look.
Thank you all. Just keep making stuff. Don't give up. It's not easy, but it's worth it. I'll say that.
Thank you, Kirei. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye, guys.